On October 2nd, 1996, Aeroperú Flight 603 was on the second leg of its trip from Florida to Chile. After disembarking 42 minutes after midnight, the captain and crew of the plane immediately noticed discrepant altitude and airspeed readings and requested for an immediate return to the airport. The captain received an overspeed warning, and the co-pilot received an underspeed warning. A wind warning sounded even though the plane was in very calm weather, and the plane's altimeter had conflicting altitude measurements, which caused the plane to automatically descend. It was pitch black, and the plane was flying over water, so the airport controller sent a Boeing 707 to help guide the plane to the runway. Believing that they were at a safe altitude, which was marked by their altimeter as being 9,700 feet, the pilots continued their descent. Strangely enough, the plane started stalling, but the altimeter showed no significant change from the plane's original safe altitude. Then, before the Guide 707 could take off, the plane's wing struck water. The pilots realized too late just how inaccurate their instruments were. They managed to keep the plane aloft for 17 fleeting seconds before the plane crashed into the sea. The impact killed all 70 people on board, and the Guide 707 had reached the scene too late. But why did all of that expensive equipment fail at the same time? Tape. An employee had attached dimly colored duct tape to the static ports of the plane in order to clean the fuselage, and had forgotten to take them off afterwards. These static ports are essential when determining a plane's altitude or velocity, so having tape covering them had caused the spontaneous malfunction of most of the plane's navigational instruments and the deaths of 70 people. For 3 years, nobody could decide who was at fault for the accident. Boeing was accused of not incorporating proper port covers and requiring tape to be applied to the ports before cleaning the plane. Boeing's defense was that the employee involved had used the wrong tape, as the standard tape to be used during cleaning was brightly colored industrial tape, as opposed to the dim duct tape the employee had used. Eventually, the employee was sentenced to 2 years in prison for negligent homicide, and each of the victims' families received, on average, $1 million each in compensation. Aeroperú, which was already struggling financially, declared bankruptcy in March of 1999. Millions of dollars in damages and compensation because of an ignorant employee and a few pieces of tape. An unlikely occurrence at best. At least, that's what one would think. In truth, very expensive accidents caused by extremely small components are scarily common. For example, Space Shuttle Challenger's horrific explosion on January 28, 1986, was caused by the failure of a single O-ring gasket. This gasket was built to withstand tens of thousands of pounds of pressure, but wasn't built to work in cold weather. The launch site was surprisingly cold that day. A simple environmental change and the failure of the small gasket ended up costing NASA $5.5 billion in damages and tragically ended the lives of the 7 brave souls aboard. When the Hubble telescope was released into space for the first time in 1990, the main mirror was mispositioned by 1/50th of the width of a human hair, rendering the telescope relatively useless. The return trip to fix it cost $1.5 billion. A European rocket called the Ariane 5 converted a 64-bit floating point to a 16-bit integer that was above the maximum 16-bit value. This small but crucial detail caused the rocket to self-destruct. Costs were anywhere from $370 to $500 million. A Venus flyby spacecraft named Mariner 1 in 1962 had an incorrect trajectory because of a misplaced hyphen in the code. This, combined with a failure in the airborne beacon, convinced the range safety officer to self-destruct the rocket before it could cause more damage on the ground. The beacon and the hyphen essentially became worth what would now be $673 million. There's so many infinitesimally small things that can go wrong with everything that it's incredible anything works at all. It's also incredible that we're not dead. These accidents, however tragic, usually don't cause the deaths of more than 1,000 people, except when they involve nuclear weaponry. On January 23, 1961, a Boeing B-52 Superfortress developed a significant fuel leak in its right wing prior to conducting an aerial refueling over Goldsboro, North Carolina. Unable to control the aircraft any longer, the crewmen decided to abandon ship. 5 crewmen successfully ejected. 1 died from his parachute landing and 2 died in the crash. The bomber was all that was left. Well, that isn't entirely true. It was carrying 2 4-megaton thermonuclear bombs and was about to crash in the middle of North Carolina. Each bomb was about 260 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Judging by the fact that many are unaware of this event and that North Carolina still exists today, the bombs didn't detonate on impact. If they had, the surrounding 8.5 miles would have been instantly obliterated and the fallout would have reached New York. But something prevented them from detonating. After the crash, the US government reassured the American people that the bombs had no chance of blowing up. However, this was not true. One of the bombs had become completely armed except for one low-voltage switch. One switch saved potentially millions of lives. But what's the point of all this? Society has always been a compendium of pieces that work together in unison to increase productivity for each member. However, there has never been another era in history in which every small piece in a society is as densely compacted as it is now. But compaction means that even the smallest components of the smallest pieces need to work flawlessly for the whole to work as well as it can. This means that enormous strain is being put on incredibly small objects. While we've managed to navigate this with little difficulty so far, it is not uncommon for these little parts to fail. But now, tiniest pieces have sometimes become life or death for hundreds or even thousands of people. This will only happen more often the smaller the pieces get, and at any moment the switch on the thermonuclear bomb could detonate instead of falter and decide life or death for the entirety of Earth's inhabitants. So, let's be careful.